everyone, welcome and welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another episode of Tech Girl Thursdays. Today I'm here with Laura and
Hi.
and we are going to be hearing about her experiences in the tech field and working in tech and school and everything. So I'm super excited to have Laura on today. Thank you so much for joining me on this Zoom call. Could you tell me a little bit about your background and hobbies, interests?
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited to be here as well. So, a background on me is that I'm currently a senior at Oregon State University studying computer science. I got into computer science on accident, so I randomly selected CS as my major. A few years later, it turned out to be probably the best choice I've ever made, so no regrets there. I will be an incoming PM at Microsoft starting in June 2021, so I'm really looking forward to that. And hobby wise, I have always been interested and surrounded by art, both visual art and also through music. So I played piano growing up for 10 years, clarinet, I was in band, and yeah.
So diving in more into your tech background. So how and when did you get into the tech field?
Yeah, so I had no prior programming experience before university. So university was kind of my first foray into the tech field, I guess just through becoming a CS major. Admittedly, both my brother and dad are both in the CS field. They're both software engineers. However, I was never really intrigued by CS, and it just seemed boring, chaotic, and just really difficult. So when I got to Oregon State, I originally wanted to be an economics major because I wanted to go into finance, make a lot of money, etc. However, I really realized that that just wasn't the right field for me, and I needed a way out. So I said, okay, well, let's switch to engineering. I know Oregon State has good engineering programs, and I'll just do CS because that's the closest thing to me that I know because of my family. So there, I really struggled through my first year in computer science because programming was just so difficult to me. And I'm not, or I guess I've always been strong in science and math fields, but for some reason, computer science was just this whole different beast to me. So I was spending, 10 hours a week in office hours my first year. And honestly, that was the key reason that made me actually love computer science is how much I was learning and how collaborative it felt through going to all these office hour sessions. And from there, I was actually able to get an internship my freshman year, which is something I never thought possible. And that kind of just kept the snowball going in terms of motivating me to stay in the tech field.
That's so great. And that's really great to hear too. Um, I think kind of that struggling factor that you talked about, like the amount of time that you put in, like it feels worth it at the end. I don't know. That's what I've felt too. Like, so I'm curious to hear more about your experience in computer science at Oregon State. So, like, what's the environment like? What's the curriculum like? Do you have any like favorite classes you've taken?
At Oregon State, our introductory series is broken up into three separate courses, and we have a quarter system. So we have 3 terms per academic school year, not counting the summer term. So the first thing that scared me was when I had my first introductory class, the professor went, okay, so we're a quarter system school, which means that we have to fit a semester school curriculum into a quarter system. And I was like, what? That's crazy. Like, I already know nothing about programming. Like, how do you expect me to learn everything from theory to programming in an intro class in an already condensed term? So that was one thing that scared me. But overall, I think the Oregon State program is good. I've really enjoyed it because it feels like the professors are just very caring across the board and they really want to help you succeed. And our TA program is also fantastic. I'm biased because I am a TA in the TA program, but I can easily say that TAs made the complete difference in terms of my understanding of the curriculum and also just encouraging me to stay in CS and really pushing me to also learn and do the work on my own as well. Um, Overall, I think the class curriculum isn't the most difficult. Obviously, Oregon State is no MIT or CMU, so it's not the same level of being pushed. But again, regardless of if you're new or if you have some experience, the classes are still challenging enough that you're guaranteed to learn something and that you'll become a better computer scientist or programmer by the end of the course. I will have to say that diversity wise, it's a little bit lacking, like many CS programs, I'm sure. So the gender diversity is pretty stark from what I've noticed in intro classes. So it only gets less great as we go into the upper division courses. But obviously, that's something that the school is trying to work on, and also an effort that I want to get involved with and have been trying to get involved with. So, nothing's perfect, but everyone and everything is always moving forward and making progress there. In terms of favorite classes, that's hard to say because I'm one of those people that kind of like I enjoy everything when I'm doing it, I guess. And then looking back, I'm like, oh, that was not a very great class. Or I don't know. I'm just not like a super opinionated person, I guess, in terms of these kinds of things. If I had to pick, I would honestly say operating systems too. It's a class that I'm currently TAing for. But the reason why it was my favorite is just because, again, it really comes down to the community and the people that are in that class when I'm taking it. And the TAs in the class were amazing. They were super approachable and just really helpful. And the professor was always available too. So combining that with a tough curriculum and just interesting material, I would say that OS2 was my favorite class.
I love what you were saying. I love like how it sounds like the TAs and the professors were super welcoming, and that's
Mm-hmm.
honestly such an underrated part about like getting into computer science. Like I feel like that could
Yeah.
totally influence like how you look at the whole field and how you learn it as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great that you had that experience, and you're also like I guess giving back as well. So as a TA too. So I love
Definitely.
that
Yeah, that
cycle.
was one of my main motivators to be a TA is I leached off my TAs so many times during office hours. So, paying it forward, I guess, in some sense.
During college, you've become like interested in product management. How did you learn about product management and like what led you to product management?
Again, like most things in my life, it kind of just happened. There was really no planning or foresight in it. So this all happened because I had the opportunity to be an Explore intern at Microsoft this summer. And just the background there is that the Explore program is intended for first and second year students to learn more about both product management and software engineering. So I actually already had a software engineering internship prior to my Explore internship. So I was relatively familiar with what software engineering was. But honestly, before my internship, I had zero clue what product management was, nor was it ever on my radar. So going into the internship, I had all my mind set on, I'm going to be a software engineer because that's what CS majors do, and that's just the natural path for me to go down. During my internship, though, I was able to connect with my mentor, who was a product manager at Microsoft, and he was just really passionate about the work he was doing, and it was awesome to see someone had that kind of passion and motivation for their work. And I guess kind of by chance or happenstance, just because I was working more with the PM side of the team, since everyone on my intern pod was paired up with a PM mentor, and we didn't actually have a direct software engineer mentor. I just got more opportunities to interact with the PMs on my team. They all seemed really cool. Not that software engineers aren't by any means, of course. But I just got along really well with the PM team, and I spent a decent amount of time just exploring more about the PM field. And from there, that got me really excited and thinking about how, maybe I could actually be a PM instead of being a software engineer. So I also took this time to think about where my natural strengths were. So I like to characterize myself as being someone who's opportunistic. I really enjoy helping other people, helping people achieve their goals, working with people, and just collaborating with people. And I also like to think that I have a lot of empathy for other people and their problems. So, collecting this feedback about myself and also looking at like software engineering versus the PM discipline, I just gravitated more towards the skills needed to be a good PM. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm not doing great on my software engineering interviews, even though I'm trying to practice leak code and do all that stuff. So let's just be a PM. And so I had the opportunity interview to be a full-time PM at Microsoft, and I got accepted. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I ended up in PM by complete accident and chance.
So
Honestly,
what type of work do PMs do on a day-to-day basis?
yeah. So I also want to clarify here that PM can stand for three different adjectives or acronyms. Yeah. So it can be both project manager, product manager, or program manager. And each of these jobs are going to have slightly different roles or things that you do on a day to day basis. So at Microsoft, we call them program managers, but they do the work of product managers. So they're working with the product. Um, so just speaking from what I know, it can kind of vary depending on what team you're on and what kind of functions they need you to perform. But there are two, I want to say, like main aspects of PM. So one is design focused PMs versus more technical focused PMs. So design focused PMs, they will actually spend a lot of time working on the UI UX side of things. So they'll be doing mock-ups for their product, working on user research and understanding customer needs, stuff like that. Whereas a more technical focused PM will be working more directly with engineering teams, setting up meetings with customers and interfacing between customers and engineering teams. Um, one spoiler alert that I would like to make is that I obviously haven't been on the job yet. So again, I'm just kind of speaking from my experience talking with other people. So please do not, or at least take my words with a grain of salt in terms of what a PM day to day life looks like. But I know in general, PMs are very, very busy because you are placed with different projects from across your team. So you're not usually in charge of just one feature area, you're in charge of at least 2 to 3 feature areas. So you can interface with many different engineering teams and also just get a lot of visibility across the organization as well. With that comes a lot of meetings. So your day will be blocked off by a lot of meetings. You'll be talking to your teams, your customers, your stakeholders, stuff like that. So you'll be bouncing around a lot of the time. And a good organization and solid communication are really key to being a good PM there.
So I kind of want to jump back a little bit in the timeline. So just like
Mhm.
talking about your previous internships. So you mentioned that you had an internship after freshman year, and then after that you had like some other internships and then Explore Intern at Microsoft. So I was wondering if you could just like go into each of those experiences and like what you did, what you learned, and how they were in general.
And I guess just to also provide some background and clarity because this timeline can be confusing. So, freshman year was 2018 to 2019. Sophomore year is 2019 and 2020, and then I'm graduating this year. So I'm graduating in 3 years. So I'll call this like my final and senior year, and I'll be, missing the junior year in between. So freshman year, I interned at a local company in Portland. They are actually headquartered in Chicago or somewhere in Illinois, I think. But they had a branch out in Portland. So I'm from Oregon, obviously, and I went to Oregon, or I go to Oregon State. So I actually had a friend who was already on board as an intern at this company, and he was like, Laura, like you should just apply, like there's no harm. I think they still have an opening. And, I think you're smart and even if you are new, like, you have that skill and capability to apply. And so I did, and it was really scary because it was my first ever real interview, I guess. And again, I was really lucky because this is the only internship I really applied for freshman year because I convinced myself that I couldn't do any internship as a freshman, which is totally false. There are also so many freshman specific internships that you should look at if you are a freshman or a sophomore. But yeah, so I was onboarded as a software engineering intern on the document processing team. And what I did was I had two projects. So one was a front end project where I had the opportunity to learn React and use JavaScript and also learn JavaScript because that was new to me too. And I worked on a team with all seniors, so incoming seniors that year. And I was really scared because I was, the only freshman on this team. or I guess incoming sophomore, the only incoming sophomore on this team, and everyone else was just older, and that was really intimidating to me, and it still probably is intimidating to me if I were to be placed in the same situation. However, it kind of put me at ease because internships are really a balancing ground because so many times, even if it's your first internship, it's also probably their first internship too, which I found to be the case. Everyone on my team, that was actually their first software engineering internship. So we were able to kind of balance it out, right? Even if they had taken more classes, they knew more, they had never been in a professional industry environment before. And so it wasn't like I was innately behind. There were all these skills that I could learn on the job, but you can't really learn experience, right? So that was one thing that I really took away is that what you learn in school or what makes you a good student does not necessarily make you a good intern or make you a good engineer or make you a good whatever, fill in the blank. Another thing that I learned is that a lot of these skills that you're expected to have, you aren't really expected to have. You're just expected to be able to learn them on the job relatively quickly. Obviously, in an internship, if you're having to learn a new programming language, that's a bit of a time crunch. But on the real job, I guess not a real job, but in a full time job, you have so many months to learn, have code reviews, get your code reviewed, stuff like that. That, it's not really that scary to be jumping into a new environment because as a new hire, you're expected to take that time to onboard. Kind of going on a side tangent here about onboarding and stuff. Um, but yeah, that was a really important lesson that I learned. Another thing is also that just don't be afraid to dive into new projects. So, like I mentioned, I guess I never really explained my project, but I had my first front end project, which was working with React to redesign a search page. But on the other hand, I also really wanted to work in backend engineering because that seemed really cool and I knew nothing about it. So I just randomly hopped onto the backend engineering project that another group of interns is working on. And I also was able to kind of become the project lead as an intern on that project simply because there's just some slight disorganization there. And I was happy to pick up that responsibility and gain that experience. If I didn't want to switch projects or I didn't have, the kind of insight of like, oh, I really want to try something new, then I would never have that experience. I never would have worked with AWS tools. And that was just completely new and exciting for me. So another tip, I guess, or lesson I learned is just don't be afraid to express your interests. An internship is there for you to learn and get along with new people. So if you can work with more people, that increases your visibility and kind of gets you on the board more. In terms of my second internship experience with Microsoft this previous summer, so as an Explorer intern, I was on the Azure data team, specifically SQL Server tools and experiences. And my project there was my team is in charge of creating this open source database management tool called Azure Data Studio, which is just a cross platform fork of VS Code. But the functionality is obviously different. It's meant to be used for database administrators, database management, stuff like that. And so, like VS Code, as many of you might know, you can put extensions into your VS Code to help optimize your workspace. So with Azure Data Studio, you can also do that. But the one thing that we were noticing, or the team was noticing, is that extension creation by the external community was relatively low. And we wanted to create a solution that would help promote extension creation by third party authors and also just encourage generally the kind of marketplace that you see in VS Code as well. So my project was understanding our users and customer needs. So, what was blocking them, pain points and extension creation, stuff like that. And then B was building out an extension generator. So, we had one that exists, but it was, again, taken from VS Code. So, it wasn't very specific for Azure Data Studio. So, I'll stick to the high level summary here. But basically, I was able to do user research, talk with customers as an intern, which is really exciting. And I also was able to take part in both engineering, obviously building the generator itself, and also doing go to market. So I was able to help publicize the release of the generator and also just participate in some sort of high level overview and scope of demonstrating off the generator to the team and some of our customers too. So overall, it was pretty exciting to be involved in that. And that was, again, the kind of the spark that drove me to want to be a PM in the end is how much overview or or I guess purview of the product you have. And the engineering part was less exciting for me. So yeah, it kind of just all worked out in the end of I had the software engineering experience and it was fun and I learned a lot. But then my next internship kind of built upon, hey, maybe there's more out there than software engineering.
The learnings from your first internship, I think those are so, so important. Like, just like everything you mentioned, like from like learning new things and being open to trying new things, like expressing your interests. I really liked those tips that you gave. I guess even comparing the two internships, it sounds like, I mean, they were like different roles, I guess, that you played.
Mm-hmm.
And even just like the projects that you were working on sound like really, really cool. Like, it sounds like you had a lot of impact, which I think is super cool as an intern. And you got to learn a lot, which I think is one of the greatest parts about an internship. So, in preparation for the internships, like what classes and skills helped you out? And I guess you mentioned learning a lot of things on the job. So, what skills do you think are helpful, whether it's like learning on the job or beforehand?
One thing that is maybe understated or maybe overstated, depending on where you come from, is the importance of soft skills. So soft skills are kind of hard to learn on the job, right? Because they're so innate to who we are and the way that we interact with people on a day-to-day basis. Um, but I would easily say that soft skills are super, super important for you to build, especially as an engineer. Because what I heard is that being a good engineer who can communicate well, um, explain projects, follow deadlines and explain if there are issues, that will really set you apart from other engineers who may just be more technical focused and less able to communicate well with their peers, project partners, stuff like that. So that is one key distinguishing factor that I would say you want to practice or get better at. Because again, in interviews, they aren't just evaluating how technical you are, they're also evaluating, are you good at problem solving? Are you good at explaining what you're doing and why you're doing it? And also, are you good at explaining, your ability to work on a team, work with other people, stuff like that. So that's one key thing. Another thing, I guess, in terms of classes is obviously if you're going to be a software engineer, classes like data structures and algorithms are going to be really, really helpful. Not to overstate that, I guess, because I'm sure many of you have heard that before. But yeah, just because, they want to know if you're technically able or technically strong, having that background and being familiar with what they're going to ask you about is going to be really key and really helpful. I guess another tip for engineering specifically is know how to communicate your solution and your problem solving process. Because if you're jumping around all over the place, it's not going to be easy to follow you. And then they also aren't going to be able to tell if you're a strong or a good communicator because you are jumping around over the place. So, one suggestion is just have a template of what you're going to say each time, regardless of what the problem was. So, one thing that I did was say I would restate the problem, list assumptions, list inputs, outputs, and ask if there are any constraints. And then I move on to doing a rough run through of the problem, so pseudocoding. And then once I had permission to start coding, I would go ahead and code the problem. After that, I'd run tests and then ask if there's any follow up or any questions they had about my solution. And just sticking to that one template was really helpful because the more I did it, the more easy it was to follow. And it just kept my thoughts organized and clean. In terms of PM interviews, again, structure is really key because we want to see if you're a good communicator and see that you have a logical way of thinking about things and solving these problems. So, my best recommendation here is just go to an online mock PM interview. There are really great mock PM interviews on YouTube if you just want to look up there and see the structure that people use. There's a pretty common thread of how people structure their answers. So as long as you can roughly follow that structure, then you're in a good place or you're in a good spot to start practicing your own answers and doing that mock interview. But definitely look at mock interviews, whether that's software engineering or PM or user design, stuff like that. Mock interviews are really good because you can see, what are people doing good, or what are people doing well, what are people doing poorly, and then what kind of feedback or suggestions do they have for themselves too.
What you were saying about communication skills, I I totally agree. Like I think that is such an underrated part about any tech role cuz you're working with you're working with people. Like you might be working with like code and like computers and such and just like different machinery, but like ultimately you're like working with people to like build all these tools. So yeah, what you said about communication and just making sure that you have that as part of your skill set, I think that's so important for like software engineering or even PM as well. Like what other resources do you recommend?
There are the holy grail books, so cracking the coding interview, cracking the PM interview, and I'm sure there's also cracking the data science interview out there. So definitely refer to those books in your respective discipline. So yeah, definitely read those books because all of them are going to give you a really good high level overview of what the interview process is like, what different companies are expecting, and just generally how you can prepare yourself for these interviews. And also they will give you like practice questions that you can do as well. Software engineering, I'm sure also you are well aware of LeetCode. So LeetCode, HackerRank, those two are both very popular platforms to practice the kind of interview questions that companies will ask you that are more algorithmic or data structure focused. Otherwise, besides these kinds of resources, oh, sorry, for PM, another one that's good is Decode and Conquer by Lewis Seelan. So that will also just go over common PM interview questions and a framework to answer them with. I know some people also like generally reading about PM and design books. So I know Swipe to Unlock is also a popular one. I personally haven't read it, so I can't recommend it or endorse it or anything. But I know that's a popular read. Um, but the main thing I honestly think is just having routine and structure in the way that you're practicing for interviews. So if you're a software engineering candidate, make a schedule of when you're going to practice leak code, whether that be 30 minutes in the morning after you wake up or 30 minutes after you finish your last class or something. And then on top of having, just a set time, also have a set idea of what you're going to practice on what day. So one way that I learned about doing this is within like a 2 week period, you want to practice 2 to 3 different topics, but make sure that each day you're practicing one specific topic. So on day one, say I'm practicing strings and arrays. And the way that I start out here is if, I know absolutely nothing, this is assuming from a beginner standpoint, take just any strings and arrays problems and try to solve it. So regardless of how hard it is, I would say try out a easy, a medium, or try out a medium and hard if you think you're slightly able to look at these harder problems and say, okay, what is the absolute easiest way that I can currently think of how to solve these problems? And so the next day, do the same thing, but for a different topic. And again, don't spend longer than like an hour because the point is to not burn you out. The point is just to get your brain thinking in this kind of way and practicing for these kinds of interview situations. And so again, just try to brute force it, or if you know a solution, then write that solution out. And you can test it if you want. That's not super important right now. But the next day, so I guess think about this in alternating days. So you have like an A day, a B day, or a C day if you want. So each day is a different topic. So you do A day, B day, brute force, and then the next day, A day will be writing just a very basic understanding of the problem. So understanding the problem description. So basically like rephrasing or paraphrasing the problem description, writing out what the input is, writing out what the output is, and then writing your own input and output to see if you actually understand what the problem is asking. And then I think the next step is like writing down like what are bottlenecks in the problem. So like what is going to make the problem at worst case take this amount of runtime or space complexity. So if you know like, oh, I have to sort in this problem to solve it, then that would be a bottleneck is, I have to sort in O of n log n time. And then the last step is just writing down a plain English solution. So if you had to explain this to a friend who had very little idea what programming was, how would you explain the solution to this problem to them? And so that's just one way to make sure you actually really understand the problem. And it also doesn't take too much time. Like it should only take 15 to 20 minutes per problem. So repeat for B day. And then on the next A day, go through and write out by hand a brute force solution according to the solution that you wrote down in plain English the 2 days before. And then that's, again, just the third A day, repeat for B day. On the fourth A day, take that solution and go through the bottlenecks. So what is slowing down your solution, and then see if you can optimize any part of your brute force solution, because if it's a brute force, it shouldn't be super optimized. So in that case, you can look through the problem again and say, okay, I am doing a linear search through and I can do a binary search through instead. And so this will kind of start training you to think about different steps of the problem along the way. And then finally, when you feel confident enough and you have an optimized solution, you can try the same thing with different problems on the same topic, or you can try to do the whole process on a different topic too. I would probably recommend sticking with the same topic just because you've learned kind of the ins and out of two to three different problems on that topic. And so you should feel relatively more confident solving a problem of the same topic, kind. Sorry if that was a little hard to follow, but I generally just recommend having a very clear structure of how to practice these things in order to A, help you build that habit, and B, train your brain to start thinking in a particular way that'll best help you when you're solving these kinds of data structure algorithm kind of problem solving questions. Same thing with PM. It kind of all comes down to like following a routine structure and doing these kinds of practices too.
A lot of people I've been talking to recently, they've been kind of like losing motivation to continue like a schedule for interviews. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on like how do you stay motivated during the interview process?
The short answer is I don't. um, I will say, it's hard for me to stay motivated. I mean, also granted we're in the middle of the pandemic and the election just happened and there are just so many crazy things going on right now. I think it's hard to be an accurate judge of, can I stay motivated or anything, because again, everyone says this, but again, it's unprecedented times that we're living through right now. And so the job market is crazy. Students are applying and flocking to internships and jobs like crazy because there's so few positions and so many students who really want an internship. So just don't beat yourself up if you're losing motivation, because it's normal. We are creatures of habit, right? So if we aren't used to practicing so rigorously, then you're not expected to just immediately follow into the schedule and expect yourself to do well. The old adage is something like 26 days, 30, I don't even know how many days it is, but a certain number of days to build a habit, right? So if it's in your first week or two, it's going to be really hard to build that habit. And honestly, it was really hard for me to build that habit. I kept it up for maybe 2 weeks at a time. And 2 weeks later, I would inevitably end up falling off the wagon and taking another 2 to 3 week break between my leak code sprints. So I think the biggest thing is just knowing that you are making progress and you are getting better. You're getting faster at solving these things than you were 2 weeks before, whether you think that or not. Just because mere exposure and understanding and looking at more problems will help, it's just a matter of how effectively you can do that, right? I saw some posts about, some guy studied for the Google interview for 8 months, and that's great. But some people can also get that in 1 month. But that's okay if you are the person that needs that in 8 months, right? I don't think there's any harm in taking longer to do something, because we're all on different paths and different journeys and we all function differently. So I think the biggest thing is like, don't get discouraged, don't beat yourself up. I think it's okay to be discouraged, right? Because that's part of who we are. We get discouraged when we don't meet our goals and expectations. But again, I think that's just so normal of humans and people. It's hard to be 100% all the time. It's hard to know what to do all the time. And it's hard to stay focused in a global crisis. So I think the biggest thing that we can do is forgive ourselves. I think it's really important to say, hey, I've been in a funk. I haven't been able to focus. I've been unmotivated, speaking from my own experience right now. And, it's just hard for me to concentrate and do things normally. And that's okay because, I know that I will make it through this term okay. I'm very fortunate to be in the situation that I am where my family is all safe and healthy and the people I care about are all safe and healthy. And honestly, that's the most important thing right now. I know that I am a little bit privileged in the sense that I don't have to deal with trying to interview and get a job anymore. But I can totally empathize with you and say that the job hunting process is the scariest process of being a student because that determines your future. And again, I think the biggest thing is just be kind to yourself and be a friend to yourself. Don't push yourself too hard and just take some time to realize like what's most important to you and say, okay, everything in this area is still safe and the people that I love and care about are still healthy. So I understand that I may not have a job yet or an internship lined up. However, I still have time left. Like it's only November. There are still plenty of months before the summer. And there are also always going to be companies out there hiring for great talent. So I guess, place a little bit of blind faith and say things are going to work out. I know they are, even if it doesn't feel that way. I think the more that you put that out there of like, I'm not afraid to be rejected and go through this whole process, the stronger you are, as cheesy as that sounds, and the more resilient a character you'll be able to build if that, again, doesn't sound too cheesy.
Yeah, snaps for basically all of that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That sounded really deep and hopefully motivational, but I don't know, it's kind of just the process that I use to get through my interview experience is I just kind of started trusting the process as, you know, clunky and cheesy as that sounds, and just knowing that, there's a position out there for me that is just waiting for the right person and every rejection is just saying, hey, maybe this just isn't the right spot for you at this point in time.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think thinking about rejection like that is so it it's like a game changer. Like if you think about rejection as just like a learning experience or like there's like a better opportunity out there waiting for you for this point in time, then like each rejection is kind of like you're building more experience and getting more learnings out of it. um,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. So you have worked in multiple different tech companies and you've been in different tech roles as a software engineering intern and a PM intern. And you're also in a technical major, computer science at Oregon State. So what has your experience been like as a woman in tech?
Yeah, so definitely on one hand, it does feel isolating at times because I can be the only woman in the room or, the only female TA in the room, for example. But on the other hand, I think it's an opportunity to kind of prove myself and say, like women and minorities aren't hired as just minority hires because I know that there are people out there who have that opinion of like, oh, if we have, someone who's black that's hired, they're just a minority hire. And I know obviously I am not black, so I cannot, represent that in any way. But I do want to help represent women and say, we're not just minority hires across the board. We are talented and we have those skills and capability to prove ourselves. But going back to my first point, I grew up playing video games, and so a lot of the gaming culture is, male dominated. And so on one hand, I'm kind of used to just interacting mostly with men. But I do think obviously there is a lot of work that needs to be done in this field, especially with promoting minorities and women in technology. Um, but yeah, it's a really large and lofty question for people to try to tackle now. And obviously, it'll be at the forefront of many companies to see, if they are truly diverse and inclusive in their hiring. I do want to say that I feel like Microsoft, for one, is making a good effort. For example, when I interviewed with them for the Explore program, they had people from across the country, from different universities, different backgrounds. Whereas when I interviewed with a different company just 2 weeks before, people from that interview were just only from top ranking schools, so your typical top engineering schools. And that just felt really diminishing for me as both, a state school person and just someone who was interviewing for my, a very relatively new role. And so I think it's also important to consider like academic differences in diversity, because that's also a really key factor in how we think in terms of uh, like group thinking, I guess, because everyone from different backgrounds will inevitably mean, a very different outcome in terms of problem solving and coming up with solutions there.
There are diversity things, more diversity measures that should be put in place and more initiatives. Do you have any ideas about like what type of things can be done? And I mean, like, obviously, there's like no right answer to this because otherwise it would have already been done. But I'm just like curious to see what your thoughts are.
One really important thing is hiring pipelines and setting up infrastructure to encourage girls in middle school and high school to pursue a technical career. I think just one missing, like a really important missing factor is just having that technical education at a younger age. Simply because, all we're taught is AP Bio, AP Chem, stuff like that, that is very linear in a field. But again, we never have that kind of technical education that teaches you programming or teaches you anything about computer science in so many schools across the country. And so, not just women in technology, but also um, just diversity and inclusion across the board, I think can be highly supported just by having more dedicated computer science programs across the country and integrating that kind of technical education into younger children. Um, I guess more focus on the pipeline issue. I know Microsoft, for example, they have hiring pipelines dedicated to Black neighborhoods in Seattle, or I may be slightly wrong on that, but I remember hearing something about this. But they have dedicated hiring efforts for Black communities related to CS opportunities, which I think is, one great step in a right direction. And I think other companies should look at doing similar things for minority populations respective to their locations. Again, I'm not a program manager in this area, nor do I claim to have very in-depth knowledge about this. Um, but I do know that if you encourage younger women and minorities to get into technical education by having that option available for them, there will definitely be an increase in terms of how many people are choosing to pursue CS. I already know currently, like it feels like there's tons of people in CS. Um, so it's kind of weird to think about like, well, what if we just have like another wave of women and minorities in CS? And I think that'd be awesome. But then I think that also comes down again to issues within hiring, and then um, where are they looking at our applicants and taking applicants from? So I think it's a very complicated issue. One being on the side of encouraging people to get into CS in the first place, and the other side is being, well, how can we have these hiring pipelines that are actually diverse and including everyone from different populations?
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's a hard problem, and I mean, there's like multiple different steps that should and could be taken along different areas of the pipeline, like you said. So, I mean, hopefully in the future, it improves.
Yeah.
Yeah. But actually, you've done some work related to women in tech. So you are a VP for a Women in CS Club on campus. And you mentioned to me earlier that you've done like some pretty cool things like related to the Grace Hopper Conference and other initiatives with the club. So could you just like maybe explain more about the club and then some of the initiatives you've done and
Yeah, so our Women in CS Club is actually called the ACM, or Association of Computing Machinery Women's Chapter, so ACMW for short. And as VP, I was heavily involved with kind of just recruiting efforts, so trying to encourage more freshmen in CS to come join our club, or people who were just kind of in the introductory series. I kind of leveraged my position as a TA to encourage and sell the club to people, which was a great opportunity. And I think we ended up actually doubling like the number of active participants we had per meeting, which is really great. Um, And another thing is like I think ACMW in particular is just focused as a community of women in tech or supporting women in tech. And I think having a space like that is super important for women in tech and other minorities. So I'd highly encourage having kind of these diversity related clubs at your school if you don't already, just because meeting this community, people can actually be a really good support network and an opportunity to meet more friends and people that you can actually resonate with and share experiences with. And so I think that's one reason why having a club like ACNW is so impactful, is just because you can feel comfortable sharing because you all have similar experiences and you have gone through um, the same kind of experience, at least at the institution that you're at. Um, so ACMW is kind of tangentially related to the Grace Hopper conference at our school and also kind of not. So I this year was the lead program manager for the Grace Hopper Conference Scholarship. So Oregon State recently, I think in the past 3 years, I think 3 years ago was the first time. But we've been slowly building up a program to support and send Oregon State students to the Grace Hopper Conference. And this has been a really great opportunity because I get to be involved with different people across the EECS school at Oregon State, and so it's been fun. I guess like presenting and talking to different people and kind of like pitching it out there. I have the support of a couple of other amazing women who want to support the scholarship and the people who supported the scholarship in the previous years. And we also have a really great HR person on board with us too. So he's also been really influential in terms of giving us advice and support too. So overall, I think, conferences are really important in terms of developing that sort of professional experience and just the experience of networking with professionals outside of school. And specifically, Grace Hopper is great because, it's thousands and thousands of women in CS that you never would have met otherwise that are in the same spot as you. They all want to promote women in technology, they want to support women in technology, and they just want the best for women in technology moving forward. And so Grace Hopper has been just an outstanding experience because of the opportunity that you get there that is unparalleled to so many other conferences and clubs. So my favorite experience has probably just been hearing from other people who have been to Grace Hopper as a result of my fundraising and seeing the success that they have. So, for example, this year, one of the students that attended, she was actually able to receive offers from 4 different companies just through Grace Hopper alone, which was amazing to hear, including big companies like Amazon and Chicago River Trading Company. And so that was awesome to hear and see their success. And so stuff like that is just really great to hear. We also have a post survey that we send out that kind of analyzes confidence before and after the conference, and also just how much they feel like they belong in the technical field after or before and after. And so this year, the numbers like an average before was like 6.4, feeling confident. And then the after of the conference was like an 8.5, which is amazing. Like, even for an online conference this year, where there just wasn't as much interaction, you couldn't meet as much people. I think it's crazy that that's the difference in attending an online conference for women in technology. And it was a very similar number for like how much you feel like you belong in the tech industry, also in the low six and bumped up to a high eight after the conference. So definitely my favorite part is just seeing the results and how great of an experience it is for so many women in Oregon State that would have never had that opportunity beforehand.
So tying everything up, so what are some of your goals for the future? So you're going to be a PM at Microsoft next year. So I guess it could be goals related to that or just in general career wise or life.
Yeah, that's a lofty one. I guess one goal that I have in my mind is just being a great manager someday. I definitely want to help people achieve their goals. Again, like I said earlier, I really just want to use my opportunity to help other people out as much as I can. And going into the people management field is one way to do that, I think. And it also, is just another step forward in my career. So, if that aligns, then great. So I have had the opportunity to be mentored by really, I've had the opportunity to be mentored by great managers. Particularly my previous manager at Microsoft this summer. She has been an absolute amazing mentor and supportive in terms of everything that I've been doing and looking forward to doing, especially when I joined Microsoft. And so she has kind of been the main motivator in why I want to go into people management, just because she is great at advocating for her direct reports. She is great at supporting people in terms of helping them achieve their goals. And that's kind of everything I want to be in more. So that's one thing I have planned. Another thing I have planned is I really want to go into career kind of coaching and mentoring. Um, I've been trying to help out students just volunteer based in my own free time recently, based off of um, being able to finally land my full time role. And so I want to give back and help students and early in career people as well. So moving forward, I also definitely want to still do that, especially when I have more experience under my belt too. So I guess that's a more recent goal, or something that's more approachable or attainable, is moving forward with career coaching and mentoring, and just generally being able to give more advice on how to approach the PM field or switching from software engineering to PM. Long term, again, I don't have any lofty goals like starting my own business or anything like that. I think it would be fun to go back to school at some point to do an MBA, either part time or something like that, just to supplement my knowledge as a PM. So that's also on my radar. Otherwise, I don't know. I just also have goals of trying to enjoy life more and just appreciating and expressing gratitude for the things that I do have. And taking more photos and documenting things, because I am not a photo person, and I feel like the past 6 months that kind of slipped away from me. um, so I think moving forward, like when I get to do more fun things and go out and spend time with friends and family, I definitely want to take more time to document and keep track of the adventures and time that I'm spending with people. Now, I guess just the last thing I want to say is believe in yourself, have confidence in yourself, and don't let imposter syndrome get you down.
Yes. Super important. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining me on this Zoom call today and for sharing about all of your experiences and giving such great advice and overall being such an inspirational person in general. I really enjoyed chatting with you today. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Make sure to connect with Laura on Medium and on LinkedIn. I'll put those links in the description below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.